There we go. Practice mode only. Attendees cannot join until you broadcast. Woohoo!
I didn't have it checked.
Awesome.
Which is weird because I've never checked it before, so
Yeah.
I use the automatically check and now it doesn't. So now I have.
There you go.
You learn to do something new today. Yep, and it says please wait, the webinar will begin soon.
Okay, good.
Okay, so this is what I need you to tell people. They will get an email from me tomorrow.
Okay. Can you hold that for just a second?
Yeah.
Because what I need to do is I need to send them all an email letting them know that they can jump in.
I just say apply.
Oh, you're crazy.
Hello.
Hi, Terry. My mute
Hello.
is probably on. Oh, I don't even have my headset plugged in.
Oh my goodness, you're falling behind.
My headset is still in my car. I'll be back.
Oh.
But you can't hear me, so I don't know why I'm saying that. I forgot to bring in my headset. Back door's locked.
I think your beard is on point.
Oh, good. I haven't even got there yet. I just logged in here and can you hear me? There you go. Probably now
I
you can hear
can't
me.
hear you. Say something.
Something? Something?
Now we can hear you.
Terry can hear me.
Yes.
Oh, good. You can't hear me, Dr. Harris? No, I'm saying something. Can you hear Terry?
La la la. La la la.
I can hear Terry.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 7.
You still can't hear us, huh? Well, still can't hear us? No?
Just a second. I'm working on it.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, good, good. We could hear you just fine.
Yeah, I got to get rid of this gum.
Okay. I
That's
gotta.
a bad thing to do.
Oh yeah.
Look like a cow.
I've noticed that my beard accentuates my chew also.
Oh, I'm sure.
My whole
It's,
face.
like it's an amplifier.
Yeah. Oh, it got that hair stuck up out of there. Telling
Yeah,
you.
you better get. Oh, yeah, you got to look good.
Yep.
Now,
So-
Terry, you have a new background.
Oh, no, it's the same.
Is it?
Yeah.
You're high up in the clouds.
yeah, she's over the city.
Yeah,
So-
that's a nice one.
In theory, I'm on a balcony and there's some curtains on either side, but it's kind of, I have it a little bit too close to see that.
I see. Mm-hmm.
But unlike yours, Dr. Harris, hers is a real background.
Ooh.
Oh,
Ha
wow.
ha ha.
Hey,
Hey.
virtual is as good as reality.
The thing is, I
The
may or may,
department says so.
yeah, I may or may not have stacks of things that should be put away behind the curtain. So if my
Oh.
virtual thing ever messed up, I'd be really embarrassed.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you I do have stacks that should be put away. So how many of us are there going to be together here?
So everyone on that email list, I think we have 7, including me. Is that right? Let's see.
Let's see.
So Ryan Guppy, Terry, Vicki Kennedy, Corey Turner, Julie Bush, Dr. Harris,
Okie dokie.
and invited guests.
Invited guests.
Those are all the attendees, I guess. We had like 9 registrations even yesterday. We were up to like 70 some.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good job.
Carrie, there were 71. 71.
71. Is Carrie there with you?
Yeah, she's socially distanced in at her desk. We
Oh,
like-
you're in the office, aren't you?
yeah, I'm down in Olympia today.
Oh, wow. Where do you normally live?
Um,
Where do you live?
In Edgewood, just near Sumner, Puyallup area.
Oh, yeah.
And so I got my little studio, my son's old bedroom that I work out of, and he left up the picture of the plane. If you may have noticed, that 767 was a test bed platform that my wife's husband was an engineer on. And so from a very young age, my son was just fascinated with airplanes and that sort of thing. And then went into computer engineering.
Oh, wow.
And then also that fish picture there. So when he left those 2 things on the wall when he moved out, the house and got married. And so I just couldn't take them down. So I just built the rest of my decor around that. So it's kind of
Good for you.
a fun nod to my son there.
Remnants.
Yep.
Archaeological finds.
Yes. Hi, Vicki.
Hang on. Oh yeah, I'm not muted. Okay.
You're good to go.
I think Dr. Harris continues to stalk me. Oh, he's back. Sorry.
He's back.
I'm back. I am, and thank goodness you're not muted. It would be such a shame to mute.
I wish I had the power that Lloyd probably has and could mute
people.
certain people.
It's scary. What do I say? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes, it does.
I know I have the agenda here somewhere. I'm just trying to track it down. Ah, here it is. Okay.
Where did
Hey,
you find it?
Carrie, could you do a quick screen share of one of the PowerPoints just for yuck so we can see what it looks like?
Sure.
Yeah, Terry and I met yesterday in practice with sharing the screen. And hi, Corey.
Hey, Corey, did
Hi.
I get to you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I couldn't hear you. I
Ah,
was like, I can't. How's
so
everyone doing?
it
Good.
says it's disabled participant screen sharing.
oh, thank you.
Oh, is Carrie going to show the slides or are we?
Each of you will kind of share your own slides.
Okay.
And Terry just made a point of I need to make all of you co-hosts, right?
Or allow screen share, yeah.
It looks like I have the ability to.
Oh,
Okay.
it says disabled participant screen share.
Oh,
Because you're panelists, and so that's where I need to go through. And Dr. Harris, it's probably best to make everyone a co-host for that, right?
oh,
You
there.
can do that. That's great.
How would you recommend?
Well, let's look at the participants and see what the options are. Well, I can't see your participant list.
Oh, as far as the speakers you see here are panelists.
Yeah, I know that. But if you bring up your participant list and over on the right, whoops, you should have options to do things.
More.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are the more?
Make host, make
Yeah.
co-host.
Make co-host.
Yeah.
Do it
change-
there.
There we go. Okay.
And because you're the only host at this point, none of the rest of us could see that.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to go through and make all of you co-hosts.
That would be dandy.
I feel fancy.
See, Vicky, now you have all the power that Lloyd has.
Nice.
Yes. Hi, Julie.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Julie.
And you'll
Julie.
need to remember
hello.
to add Ryan to that list when he gets on. I assume you can't add him until he logs in,
Yeah.
because I think he's running our slide deck. So
Okay.
Okay, so now I can screen share. So I suspect all of us can screen share now.
Yes. Let's find out
Dandy.
here.
Yes.
Do. How's that?
Very nice.
There we go.
Ooh,
Oh, isn't that lovely?
fancy.
Very snappy.
There's Ryan. Okay, now I can make Ryan a co-host. There
No, I
we go.
don't think you should.
Uh-oh. I already clicked the button.
I'm just kidding. I'm just.
Ryan, I believe that as a co-host, you also now have the power you've always wanted to mute Dr. Harris.
Who's Dr. Harris?
Hey, but we can all do it to each other. So
Yeah.
can't we all just get along?
Spoken like a true psychologist.
Yeah.
Oh, it does appear I can withdraw co-host permissions.
Yes, you
There you
can.
go.
Oh my God, look at the size of that bottle.
Wow.
Well, I wanted to show you up since you were drinking your water bottle.
Look at the size of that thing.
Oh,
For
good
you.
plan. All right. So I think this is the whole gang, isn't it? Right?
It's-
We're not missing anybody? All right.
We don't have any participants signed in yet?
Not yet. We're still in practice only mode.
Oh.
And
okay.
so I'll
Oh,
start.
I see. Yes. So this is the time when we all check our beards and stuff.
Yes, that's what I was saying. And make sure your hair and makeup worked.
Good job, Julie.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So we have a couple more minutes before we go live. Any last minute questions or anything? We're kind of setting out. Corey and I are kind of the hosts. I'm going to introduce Corey as our board member over vocational. What's your title again, Corey? I should write this down.
I'm just
Oh.
a
Uh-oh.
vocational representative. WSIA vocational representative.
That's all?
Pretty easy.
Really? Okay.
I
All right.
think. Oh, that's a mouthful. That's plenty.
I thought it was vice president or something like that. We'll have to work on that.
So
Assistant,
Lloyd, I have
Assistant Empress of the Universe.
That's actually Carrie Heinold, so
Oh,
can't have that.
Smart, Lloyd.
So Lloyd, just a quick question for
Yes.
you. Are you planning to monitor questions through the chat? Is that the idea?
What I'll do is I'll explain to everyone that the chat is kind of there for everybody to play around in. I intently watch the Q&A. And so I ask people if they have questions, type it into the Q&A. And then as the facilitator host, Corey and I will kind of jump in with and interrupt the speaker as the questions come up. That way as speakers, you don't have to do anything but talk and answer questions.
Okay, but the questions will come specifically in the Q&A, not in the chat.
Correct. Yep.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do we do at the end when we've decided it's all finished? Do we need to stay on or just be done?
No, you're just done. Off to the kitchen. Fresh beer.
So wait, ask that again, Terry. Sorry, I was.
When we're done with the show.
Oh, today. Okay.
Today, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, we haven't put out copies of PowerPoints. I think intentionally, I see this as being more conversational. We'll let people know that there will be resources available and PowerPoint copies at the end there. So, are we ready to go live? I like to jump up and down and get my butt moving.
Okay. Hey, Lloyd.
What?
Were you expecting us
Careful.
to do that?
Don't hurt yourself.
Carrie was trying to talk to me.
Okay.
1 o'clock. All right, Carrie was letting me know it's 1 o'clock and it's time to go. All right, we're gonna start. All right, good morning. My name is Lloyd Brooks. The attendees are loading in. We'll give it a few minutes. We're up to 18, 20, 23. Looks like we have over, what? You got nothing? Can you hear me now? Oh, good. You can hear me now. All right. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon already. Holy smokes. Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to give it a beat here while a few more people log in. We're up to 53, 54. We should have some starting music or something. I'll have to add that to my list. All right, looks like we're up to about 60 attendees logged in. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lloyd Brooks. I'm with the Washington Self-Insurers Association. With me here today, we have Ryan Guppy with the Department of Labor and Industries, Vicki Kennedy, also with the Department of Labor and Industries, Terry Wohlers, also with the Department of Labor and Industries. We have Julie Bush with Strategic Consulting, and Dr. Harris, Dr. Michael Harris with Pacific Rehabilitation Centers, and Corey Turner. And Corey is our vocational representative on our board here at the Washington Self-Insurers Association. And she is going to be my co-host here today with our other experts. And before we get started, let's go through some housekeeping items here. And here, Carrie Heinold is here in the office with me, and we're socially distancing and being safe. But she wanted me to remind you that after today's event, tomorrow, you'll receive a link to any resources and materials that and PowerPoints from today's presentation, your certificate of attendance, and Carrie, what was the other thing I was supposed to say? Survey. You'll receive a link to the survey tomorrow, correct? Correct. Did I get all the things? I got all the things, she says. So one of our attendees here, you can't see her on screen, but Carrie Heinold, you've probably interacted with her on the registration side of things, and that she makes sure all of this happens. And we've been great teammates, Chris, Carrie, and I, through this transition into our future. It's been quite a learning experience for all of us. So welcome again here today. We're going to go through some actions here just to make sure everybody's familiar with the Zoom platform. And to do that, let's have a show of hands. How many of you have used Zoom before? You've been in a presentation or a meeting or a webinar or something like that. Okay, so raise your hand. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the platform, if you hover your mouse around the screen, however you have that set up, you'll see kind of a taskbar show up, and you can see options for raising your hand. Also, there is a Q&A box, questions and answers, and you'll also see a chat box. So what we do in most of our programs here is that we open up that chat for the audience to communicate and chat amongst themselves. And what we've found also through a lot of our trainings is that oftentimes people may find great links or know of great resources on the topic in discussion, and sometimes people have dropped some helpful links in the chat. But I want to make it clear that I'm not paying attention to the chat section. Corey and I will be paying attention to the Q&A section. And so if you have questions for anybody on our panels here today, type your question into that chat box, and Corey and I will make sure that we get your question into the presentation as much as possible. Okay, so I'm going to lower all hands, and let's see, lower all hands. There we go. Now let's try something else. For those of you who have not been on this, raise your hand if you have not been involved in a Zoom presentation. See if you can find that taskbar. Okay. Got 3 or 4 people there, 5, good. Okay, so there are also options I see for raising your hand if you're calling in through a phone. And I wish I could give you some instructions on that. I see someone doing it, but I don't know how you're doing it. So well done. Let's see. So we've covered the chat box. Lloyd's not going to be watching that. The Q&A. Corey and I will be watching the Q&A and getting your questions in there as we can. This is our 4th annual Return to Work Summit. previous years, the past 2 years, we've been at Swedish Medical Center, where we had about this number of people, 60 to 70 people gathered for a summit of vocational experts and claims experts and disability experts. And for this year, obviously, we're all here on Zoom. We really kind of debated on whether we go forward with this event. We want to make sure that people are not getting too much Zoom fatigue, webinar fatigue, and I want to be conscious of that. So we want to make this day here very interactive, conversational as possible in this technology. We want to learn a lot together. And I think for me, some exciting things are happening in the world of workers' compensation. And in the meetings I've had with these experts you see in front of you over the past couple months, you know, the world is changing in so many ways, and I'm seeing so many positive ways it's going. And I see that this is opportunity where we've taken a lot of intent and structure. We've put a lot of thought into how things should be done in the future. And I've heard COVID being referred to as an accelerator. And I think that really stuck with me, in that I think we've all had a lot of great ideas, and we've all had a lot of ideas for moving into the future and making our industry better. And this world crisis has really kind of pushed some of those things forward and has really kind of given some acceleration to some ideas that really weren't getting the traction they needed when everything was fine. And so from that perspective, I've been really excited to come into today. Of these various experts you see on screen, we'll go through and let them introduce themselves here shortly. So I've said a lot of words. Real quick from our panelists, or if anybody wants to type a question in the Q&A, are there any questions before we get going? Anything Lloyd missed? Or maybe you just want to practice typing something in the Q&A. Or you could type something into the chat and say hi to all your friends. Okay, or you could get another cup of coffee. All right. All right, here we go. So I want to first go through and kind of have our presenters introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Terry Wohlers. We'll put you right up front there. I've gotten to know Terry over the course of planning this event, and Terry's one of those names that I've known in the industry, I think as long as I've been in the industry, although she looks much younger than I am. But one of those names that I've recognized, and then in my conversations prior to today, I've been able to kind of connect the dots and see where I've known of her, but have never really crossed paths. And Terry, kind of give us an idea of where you are, who you are, and kind of the path that got you there, because I think it gives a really well-rounded perspective of your knowledge.
Sure, thank you, Lloyd. So I very first started with Labor and Industries as a claim manager back in 2001, and I completed the Workers' Compensation Adjudicator Level 3 in training program, so that was before it was an apprenticeship, and went on to be a claims coach and mentor at the department. Then I made the leap into private industry as a vocational rehabilitation counselor in workers' compensation here in Washington for the next 13 years. And I came back to the department as a state fund vocational services specialist for about 1.5 years, and then I moved into the self-insurance vocational services specialist position just about 1 year ago.
Great. So as you can see, Terry's experience spans self-insurance and state fund and vocational counseling and claims management. And that's kind of one of the intents of these summits, is to bring vocational counselors together along with employers and claims adjudicators and talk about how can we better take care of our workers. And so I was really excited to kind of hear Terry's story, and I think the perspective she brings for us, and we'll be hearing from her a little bit later today. Let's go around the room here. Vicki, I think a lot of people know who you are, but for the record, why don't you introduce yourself?
You want me to keep it simple? Because if I give you my work history, we'll be here for a long time.
Well, I think you also started out at the department, didn't you?
I started at the department when we went through the great expansion from extra hazardous employment only to virtually all employment and allowed self-insurance. And that was in 1971. So this October, I have completed my 49th year. I am not necessarily trying to break any records, but it just continues to be work that really interests me. And the workers' comp world is constantly changing. So I'm now the assistant director for insurance services. I've been in this role now since April 2013.
Great. And it sounds like you're in a role where you think you can make a difference, or maybe you wouldn't be there anymore.
Or that's exactly right. If I didn't feel I was making a difference, then it would be time to hang up my workers' comp ballet shoes, if you will.
I do not have workers' comp ballet shoes.
Well, you probably do, because we often have to dance around the issues.
Yes. You may see in the background, I do have my old George manual. You see on the shelf back here?
Perfect.
My old George manual there. Well, welcome, Vicki. And Ryan.
Sure.
Ryan Guppy.
Thanks, Lloyd. My name is Ryan Guppy. I'm Chief of Return to Work Partnerships at Labor and Industries. I've been in this role come November of this year, 7 years. Prior to that, I worked, had a wonderful growing experience at UBC, which is now Pacific Rehabilitation Centers. And so 7 years ago, I departed ways with Dr. Harris et al. Over there. But I got to work with a lot of the worst, and I got to see a different approach about how you could handle those cases and those people much differently. And it was an eye-opening experience, very influential to how I have tried to bring about the changes in my role specific to vocational recovery and vocational services. Prior to that, I was an intern, and I was probably a full VRC for the better part of 3 months. Before I transitioned to Pacific, working at Strategic Consulting, and I was the 19th employee back in 2003, and the first intern, I believe, that firm had hired. So that kind of rounds out my experience. I'm also PGAP certified and have done some other things that aren't really all that important for purposes of introductions, Lloyd, but that's me, and that's where I've been, and I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about where we're going.
Uh-oh. Lloyd, we lost you. You're muted.
I was trying to be courteous and mute, and then I never remember to take it off.
No snorting or laughing, right?
Yes. All right. Julie Bush, tell us who you are.
I am a vocational counselor here in Washington. My camera on this computer is in a weird spot, so I have to focus on it. So if you see me just looking like this, I'm actually looking at the presenters, but I know it's odd. I've been doing voc rehab in Washington for 25 years, almost exclusively in the self-insured community. It's just sort of been the luck of the draw. So I've been a part of a lot of these trainings, but also through my involvement with Strategic and all of the counselors here, and with Lloyd, and I've been learning quite a bit about the Vocational Recovery Project and getting to know that quite a bit. And so today I'm just kind of here to weigh in the vocational parts on the self-insured side and give some updates and kind of tie things together for those of you who may not work with the state fund.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Also kind of an interesting dynamic here is that Julie, Ryan, and I all kind of started in workers' comp right about the same time. And, you know, I think it's been an interesting curve to watch within workers' comp, how we used to really do things, how we used to systemize people. And that was the process. We'll be talking about that some more, but it's been a fun trajectory and seeing how the world has changed. Dr. Harris, who are you?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Michael Harris. I am a psychologist. I have spent the last 30 years working in the organization that is now Pacific Rehabilitation Centers, doing all sorts of things. We have offered over those 30 years 4 pain management programs, and I've had a hand in designing all 4 of those. They treat the worst of the worst in terms of folks who are really struggling with disability. I've also been fortunate enough to be on some of the committees down at Labor and Industries and bring some of my experience as a psychologist into conversations down there that I think have been helpful to them. We are enjoying a very nice change, I think, in our workers' comp system in the last 5 to 10 years, and it's exciting. I think we're way ahead of a lot of places in the United States. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about motivational interviewing, which is a tool that can be used by any of us anytime. And
Great.
there you have it.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris was the first one who opened my world to biopsychosocial. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, you need to get in touch with Dr. Harris, because it really took my claims management out of the system. It allowed my claims management to happen for all the right reasons. The individual, the worker, in the center of that system, but understanding and acknowledging the other person's place. Trying to understand best you can where that and see, Dr. Harris, it's getting through here. I'm getting it, but trying to understand and acknowledge at least where they are instead of where you want them to be. So additionally, motivational interviewing, I think that is a component that we're going to hear about here today. Well, it is a component we're going to hear about here today. And it has a lot of places, and it's a skill really that I hope people will invest in from a learning and professional development standpoint. Today, you're going to hear how it's applied to vocational rehabilitation and getting people back to life. And what I've found is I learned about motivational interviewing through kind of a management career coaching model. But what I realized is that it's a skill that if you develop it, it can really serve you well in every aspect of what you do. And Dr. Harris had a free webinar last week on motivational interviewing and specifically what that is about. Today's conversation is going to be more theoretical with our panel of experts here, but he's going to be presenting that again downstream. And from a workers' comp standpoint, and just as a professional, motivational interviewing will change how you interact with your coworkers, your spouse, your teenagers, your parents. It allows you to gather more information and make people feel more comfortable at giving. Now I'm giving his presentation, so I better shut up.
Wait, Lloyd, somebody in the audience wants to know if Dr. Harris has a book.
Ah,
I do.
pulling it out of the ocean right there.
Oh, whoops.
It doesn't show up. It doesn't show. Oh,
okay, wait.
Right in your face.
You gotta move it quickly.
Okay. I'll get it so that it shows up.
Okay.
We'll do that in a
That's
minute.
funny.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Type it out in the QA.
Okay, hold on just a sec.
All right. And while he's doing that, last but not least, Corey Turner, my co-host here today. I've hosted a lot of trainings. Julie Bush, you've been involved in several of those through our WWCP course. But usually it's about things that I'm more nimble about. Today, I feel really out of my wheelhouse. And so happy to have Corey here today as our co-host. But Corey, take a minute, introduce yourself. Did we already do that?
No, I'll make it quick.
Okay, you were next. Okay, I got distracted by Dr. Harris's book.
No, that's okay. We can skip me altogether if you want.
No.
So my name's Corey Turner. I've been a vocational counselor in Washington State actually for 24 years. Primarily on the East. I'm based in Wenatchee and do a lot of Eastern Washington work. I am the WSIA vocational representative on the board, and my most recent haul in that has been about 3 years. And then a few years back when they first created the position, I spent about 2 years also representing. And then I've been on the Vocational Recovery Advisory Committee. I do both state fund work and self-insurance. So it's been really nice to sort of see the benefits of both and being able to sort of cross over all the different changes that are happening. So I've been able to help maybe provide some insight and feedback between the two sides, if you want to call them sides.
Yeah.
So I'm here to help Lloyd today and have a conversation with all of you about what's going on with Voc Rehab in the state of Washington. So thank you.
Great. And I think, there it is, building motivational interviewing skills. David B. Rosen. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Corey, I held it up.
It's okay. Really, I don't care.
Okay. There it is.
All right.
It's the single best one I've been able to get my hands on.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I've spoken through Ryan and Vicki for the first half of their presentation at this point. So Ryan and Vicki are going to give us kind of a level set on where we're at as of today. And then we're going to talk also, Corey's going to give us some insight on the committee that she's involved with, and then going into some motivational interviewing, some reporting with Terry, and then closing out with Julie Bush and talking about where is the current labor market and what's going on with it. So with no further ado, Ryan, share your screen.
Great. Thanks, Lloyd. Give me just a moment here. Can everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. And let me make sure I put it into slideshow mode. Can you all still see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Do you see the notes section, or do you see just the presentation?
See the note section.
Okay.
No, I think that's just the next slide.
Yeah.
No, it's also the notes.
The notes, okay.
Yeah, it's both.
Let me do a new screen here. Apologize, everybody. How about now? What can you all see?
Your email.
There you go. You got it, Ryan.
Just the presentation now. Okay.
Right.
You know, as his boss, I was trying to see what was in his inbox, but it was too quick.
This is one of those little things that no matter how many times you do these, you always pick the wrong screen when you go to share your screen. So I appreciate everybody's patience and flexibility in this new world we find ourselves in. Today, Vicki and I have slated about 25 to 30 minutes just to do some level setting to kind of launch the rest of the day's topics and presentations. You can see here from the title here, we're going to talk about the vocational recovery model, not the project, not the referral type, but the model, to help share with you what our visions were, our goals, updates, and next steps. And we think that that would be a great place to launch the rest of today's presentation. I will tell you that if you've come to the Return to Work Summits in the past, if you've participated in Washington IARP Spring Conference, or otherwise seen Vicki and I present on this topic, you will see some repeat information. And what we found is, because this is so new and so innovative and so different than, as you heard Lloyd say, for the last 20, 25 years, it requires a little repeating once in a while, because as we find ourselves in the new model, there's context for some of this stuff that means something a little bit different now that we find ourselves here. Lo and behold, it's intended to be a quick review, not a deep dive on the worker-centric model or work disability prevention or any of the other stuff we spend a lot of time on giving you the background. It's really just about where we're at as a system right now, moving forward, and what parts of that are really correlated to self-insurance community. And with that, I'll hand it over for Vicki, because I think she's going to talk about the next couple slides, which Vicki, just let me know when you're ready for me to advance the slide deck, and I'm more than happy to do that.
All right, so I'll let you go ahead and move on to the first slide.
Okay.
So what you see here is what our vision was when we started the Vocational Recovery Project. So vocational recovery is now a state fund referral type. And those of you who might be a little bit new to this, may be scratching your head about, well, but I'm a self-insured employer, or I do only self-insured work. I think what we've certainly learned and wasn't, I would say, was a bit of a surprise to us. While this was our vision for the project, it has really become so much more. It has become the Washington state culture for workers' compensation. Lloyd referred to it a little bit, some of the interests that we get outside of our system and outside of Washington, but there's a lot of national and international attention to what we're doing because it is innovative and new. Lloyd, I appreciated something that you said about this session being along the lines of how can we take better care of our workers. That's exactly what vocational recovery is. And interestingly, anyone who at some point wants to ever talk about the data on the state fund, if we do a better job by our workers in vocational recovery, employers win. And they win through morale, they win through keeping long-time workers, and they win through reduced workers' compensation costs. So it's really the best for everyone involved. But part of what we wanted to talk about today too, is just to touch on, so how do we get here? How do we affect a culture shift and then operationalize it? And Ryan, if you want to go on to the next slide, I think most of you have seen this. This is L&I's agency goals that we started in 2013. And this really took the place of a big, bulky, strategic or business plan at the agency level. And it gives people something that they can really dig into and see themselves in. And where we've focused a lot is on goal 2, helping injured workers heal and return to work. That really gave us the foundation for this culture shift. And it really involved, I'd say, Ryan and I first, but a lot of people have certainly jumped on the train with us. Really being willing to take some risks and do something new and innovative when I think we all recognize what we were doing in Voc simply wasn't working for the system, it wasn't working for employers, it wasn't working for workers overall. We needed to find ways to inspire people, to get them involved. We trained folks on new approaches, we consulted with other experts, but what we were really doing is helping people see themselves and their family members in these agency goals when it came to vocational recovery, work disability prevention, and return to work. I think a lot of us could think differently about the work we do if we thought about, if my daughter was that injured worker, what system do I want them in? How do I want them touched by their employer or by the TPA or by a VRC? And I think you quickly move to something more like the vocational recovery model than the traditional AWA that we'd all been very accustomed to. Ryan, you want to go ahead and go on to the next slide?
Sure.
So this statute's been changed a little bit over time. The most recent changes, I think, in 2015 with representation of both business and labor being behind some of those changes. But I think there are really some important messages that are in red and certainly the message in blue, that this is not just about the department. This is also about self-insurers. And some of the language, Ryan will often talk about reading the rules or the statute periodically. And I don't think any of us do that. We think we know it, but going back and refreshing yourselves can really help point out some things that you maybe never noticed before. So our statute, for example, is about enabling workers to become employable at gainful employment. It's not about finding them employable. It's not about getting an ATW-7 and ability to work with transferable skills. That's not what the statute talks about. It's really clear that our aim needs to be about making workers employable at gainful employment. The best way to do that, of course, is to actually get a return to work outcome. It's also important to note that that this needs to happen before medical treatment's concluded. A lot of systems, not just ours, wait till the medical treatment's over with. Now let's talk about VOC. No, the design of our statutory mandate is to be assisting workers and providing them the support they need as early as possible, as is reasonable on that claim. And that support can come through an employer, because a lot of self-insured employers have some excellent programs themselves, or through a vocational counselor if that's really the right next move on the claim. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, Ryan. And I believe this is where I'm turning it over to you.
Kind of, we're off a slide, but that's okay. We've done this dog and pony a couple times. I think we'll be fine. Just kind of building off what Vicki said. I've highlighted some parts here in the second section of the statute, just because I think it's the part of it that most people that work in the return to work space are most familiar with, and that's our return to work priorities. But there's some salient information that I think needs to be pointed out here, leading with the last statement before going into the return to work priorities, with the highest priority given returning to work or to employment, not necessarily to the employer of record. And the other talking point that I wanted to give everybody too, just because we're not spending a ton of time on this, is that when Vicki mentioned that the statute applies not just to the state fund, but also self-insurers, it's just of note, and I'll show this in a minute, our vocational recovery rules for state fund are a direct almost interpretation of this language. So in a sense, one could argue it's applicable to the self-insurers when they order a vocational provider to come in, because they have to effectively work through the statutory language prior to getting to whether or not this person is eligible for retraining or not. The self-insured, the state fund, the AWA rules, which I'll show as well, also speak to that. So it's worth noting and worth paying attention to. And I think that in the future, there could be some new and different legal arguments brought into the courts over ATW 7 closures and recommendations. And my hope is that that new argument is challenging that recommendation to ensure that the statute was filed prior to that point. And that will be when we really start to see some people change their minds about what's important and what's not. But essentially, voc recovery is just our interpretation of following the statute. So the next slide then gets into a little bit more detail in our rules, but this one specifically relates to those people who work in the self-insurance space, who are claims adjudicators, claims managers, that are going to sit for their WWCP credential. And I'm not an expert on the whole process behind that, but the rule language states that those people who are going for their WWCP certification have to have what you see here on the screen. Work disability prevention, including worker-centric recruiter practices, and other vocational recovery interventions. So you can see now, if you think this is just a state fund thing, it's actually quite more than that. It's a Washington state thing. And that's kind of the point that we want to bring home from a foundational starting point for today's talk. This goes into the new rules, the new vocational recovery rules. 296-19A-050 used to read, what are early intervention services? And it was limited to the first 4 return to work priorities. Well, based on the way we're looking at the statute and the way it reads, like black and white verbatim, we actually are compelled to look at the first 7 return to work priorities before transitioning to that employability or AWA assessment. And I believe there was a chat earlier about if these materials will be available to folks, and yes, they will. I know that all of us send our presentations into Lloyd and Kari ahead of time. They'll make these available to you after the presentation, so you can go back and reference them. I think this one's mine too, Vicki. So I'm just gonna go through this a little bit more. This just fleshes out some of the more salient points in vocational recovery services in section 2 of our rules, where we're talking really about assisting the worker in identifying return to work goals and steps, proactively addressing barriers, and providing work disability prevention best practices. Again, all those things are very universal. They're not dependent on jurisdiction. Quite frankly, I believe the statute compels those who order voc services to incorporate these into the practices. Again, here's the last section. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it, but here's a little bit of an insight at the very end here, right? So it's like, well, if you're going to lead with the first 7 return to work parties, when do you go into that employability assessment or able to work assessment phase? And it's outlined at the very bottom there, that you really need to complete the sections of that of that rule, which are a direct interpretation of the statute prior to moving into that phase of vocational services. So we believe that the new vocational recovery rules are a nice platform to bring about the change. And quite frankly, a number of our advisors and other people in the private sector, including our pilot VRCs and our vocational subcommittee members, recommended that we be as clear and as direct as possible in our rules. So literally, we copied and pasted the return to work priorities and put them in there. So they're pretty straightforward. This is the last one. This talks about an ability to work assessment. This is the state fund rule, but it also applies to self-insurers, and it's really intended to determine if the person's eligible to receive vocational plan development services. That's the intent. We led with the system-centric approach for many, many years. It did not make our system more fiscally healthy. It did not make our employers healthy. It did not make our workers healthy. And so even when we get to a more system-centric or adjudicative feeling type of a phase of vocational services, our rules provide guidance for those who might be lost or who have lost the worker in the process. And so that's why we wanted to share that with you. And here's some more. Again, we'll share this with everybody afterwards. This just kind of is another illustration of what we want to have happen during an ability to work assessment. And clearly based on this language, the intent is not to lose the worker in the process like Lloyd talked about earlier. That's really what we're trying to do here. We'll talk more a little bit about it later on in this first introductory point about how we're going to determine and or help people make sure they can make good on our rules. And we'll get there in just a moment. I believe we're off a little bit, but I think this is your slide, Vicki. Is that correct?
Nope, this is all yours.
Okay, well, everybody's seen this before, I think. This is one of those definitions, kind of like our statutory language on our rules, that it's good to go back and look at once in a while, just for some level setting. And it's really important to pay some attention to the words that I've highlighted here. Result of a decision by the worker as to whether or not they're going to go back to work or not. Whether or not they feel incapable or capable of returning to work. And then what are the determinants that are influencing those outcomes? That's really what vocational recovery is aimed at when you want to boil it down to a human perspective. It's what's going on between the worker's ears. What do they think needs to happen? What value do they have in returning to work? And then what other things are in the way? Is the system in the way? Is the employer in the way? Is a TPA in the way? Is a VRC in the way? Is a skill set in the way? Is lack of motivational interviewing what's in the way and making those breakthroughs? But we do believe that work disability is a result of a decision made by the worker to not return to work. It's up to the vocational providers, it's up to the claims adjudicators, it's up to the doctors, and it's up to the employers to make it easier for the worker to choose to return to work. And that's one of the stated goals. Okay, now, am I off the
You are off the
spotlight now? Okay, great, I can breathe.
Yeah, and people who know us know that afterwards we're going to probably argue about who had the slides assigned right and who didn't, but it's all right. It gives us new challenges to.
I have it in documentation. I have it in documentation for Vic.
As do I, but I count
you lose.
the page. How's that? You know, one of the things I just wanted to comment on when Ryan was going through the definition of an ability to work assessment that's in the rules, and it talks about an AWA being used to determine whether or not a worker is entitled to plan development services, and that's not new language. That's been there for years, ever since I can remember. And yet somehow an AWA turned into be something much more than that, much more of a broad adjudication tool that really drove a lot of, you know, did this worker have any entitlement to future benefits or not? And I just wanted to point that out. It was never necessarily designed to be all that, but that's what it turned into. So Ryan mentioned in the rule language the references to work disability prevention, and these are what we refer to pretty consistently as the principles of work disability prevention. Similar to the agency goals, they're very simple. People can see themselves in it and the processes that they use in it. I think all of us can relate to something we do as workers' compensation professionals and employees that impact one or more of these principles. And particularly for employers, for VRCs, for claim managers, you have a great influence on number 2 and number 4. And those are critical to helping a worker through the system, driving towards return to work. I'd say even more so than some of the others. But think about that as you're working with injured workers. Are you helping prevent a confusing process? Are you helping prevent unclear return to work expectations and plans? And I'll let Ryan get into more detail too, along with even thinking about some of the tools Dr. Harris will talk about for motivational interviewing. That helps address number 4, helping that worker through the return to work expectations and plans. And Ryan, I can tell you want to say something.
Just so people are aware, like there's a citation here from Centric Disability Management Services. And for those of you that have attended the Return to Work summits in the past, you'll know that Jason Parker is the president of Centric Disability Management System. He's been an international work disability consultant expert for us for many years now. And I just want people to be rest assured that we're not just taking something that a consultant is willy-nilly telling us and running with it and changing our whole system based on that. We have validated these statements through the review of the literature of work disability prevention. So these are evidence-based statements. We just happen to ask him permission to use it the way he phrases it. So for those of you who don't believe that he's a credible source because he's never done VOC in this system, rest assured he is a work disability expert at the international level. And what he's talking about is directly out of the literature.
Yep,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah, he gave us a nicely synthesized few bullets that help take all of that evidence and pull it together into a message.
This is some of that right here. Go ahead, Vicki.
Exactly right. And the only comment I was going to make here, Ryan, is that is when you look at this and it talks about evidence-based interventions, what we've intended is that vocational recovery is that evidence-based intervention. I'd say similar to the principles of work disability, voc recovery is based on a lot of research into best practices. Granted, we may be the first to really test it in the way that we're testing it, but it is very well informed by years of evidence that's out there that, frankly, I think workers' comp generally has been awfully slow to pick up on. Do you want to add anything there, Ryan?
Nope, I'm just going to move us forward. This
Okay.
one's yours too.
All right. So also, I think one of the things, again, from the research from the Handbook of Work Disability Prevention and Management, is to keep in mind that work disability is different than independent from the medical condition that the worker is dealing with. If a worker is not working, then you have a work disability situation. And the interventions are different. The worker's needs may be very different. And a lot of this is identifying what those needs and factors are that are the reasons behind the worker not yet returning to work. Do you want to go on to the next one, Ryan? And is this one yours or mine?
No, it's yours as well.
All right. So here's some of those contributing risk elements. Certainly, you can see some connection back to the work disability prevention. For example, unclear processes, roles, and pathways to return to work. But a lot of these also go into those psychosocial risk factors that Lloyd mentioned that he first learned from Dr. Harris. So part of our role is to explore some of those factors so that as a vocational professional or sometimes even as a claim manager or an employer, you're beginning to take steps to resolve those for that worker and eliminate some of those barriers to return to work. Unless you have something to add, Ryan, go ahead and go on to the next one, which is your slide.
Yeah, so Vicki mentioned that a lot of this work disability prevention stuff is richly documented and outlined in the literature, and this is our evidence-informed approach to the intervention. What we couldn't find in the literature was a definition for what worker-centric meant. Plenty of stuff in there on what patient-centric means and patient-centered care. Rest assured, those are significantly different than worker-centric. That's medical model terminology, and it means something completely different than what we mean by worker-centric in the work comp space. So this is our working definition, if you will, of worker-centric. And until we see it pop up in the literature, we're going to keep running with this one and augment it as need be, because again, this is an evidence-informed approach. Because we're like no other jurisdiction in the United States of America at this point in time. We looked to see if we could copy somebody else's model, and we absolutely came up with a dead end, even through all our work with the IABC, or the International Association of Industrial Insurance Boards and Commissions. I can't believe I almost got tongue-tied on it and couldn't say what it was. We asked for years if anybody had insights, and they didn't. So here's our starting point. This is our definition, and it does not mean, though, that we sideline the employer's needs. And it does not mean that the medical provider does not play an important role. And it doesn't mean that we must apply the same techniques to the worker to engage them as we do the employer and the medical provider. All it means that if we're leading with the worker-centric approach, we're adding in some of the employer, we're approaching the doctor and asking the right questions at the right time. And then lo and behold, the evidence shows if you do it in that order, in that way, using some of the tools that we've incorporated in our vocational recovery manual, which is available online, the likelihood of increasing a positive return to work outcome increases substantially. So that's our worker-centric definition. It is not a worker advocacy model. It is not a claims advocacy model. It does not mean that we give the worker any and all demands they come up with. It's that we gently guide them through the process and help them understand how they can be an active member and play an active role in that process. And we believe that having them be in the lead role of what their recovery looks like, their vocational recovery looks like, helps put them into a place of a higher sense of control about what their destiny is instead of everything happening to them. Now, we've shared this next couple slides before with everybody. I'm going to hand it back over to Vicki, but people ask, yeah, but does all this stuff work? And Vicki alluded to it earlier. Vicki, I don't know if you and I are doing this right now. We're out of time at this point, so we can just go through the last 3 slides pretty quickly.
Yep. So yeah, I think we can make this pretty fast. So first of all, is this working? And this slide just represents the first piece of making it work. We have to get cases in the hands of vocational professionals much, much sooner than we did in the past. And this represents that much sooner. As a result, we have greatly increased our return to work outcomes 207%. Just in from the date that we started activating vocational professionals into the claims much sooner. Didn't have VR yet. The VR comes when you begin to see that significant spike upward, where we were simply piloting VR, and I think at the same time, the voc community was getting much more comfortable in taking some of the concepts and applying them even in the AWA model. A little bit of a downturn in the latest data. Not to any surprise, we're going to see that, especially as we work through the pandemic. But when you go back to past years, until about 2018, the return to work outcomes were never the greatest outcome from our initial voc services. And now it consistently is.
Okay, so just a couple more last pieces I want to leave everybody with. The vocational recovery project's been going on for a couple years now. It's boiled down to these last four pieces, and there's one more that it's not on here. It's VRC firm and registration requirements. But where we're at right now is we're moving forward the worker-centric approach with vocational recovery as our initial referral type. Started January 1 of this year. In order for us to more effectively drive quality, we went to a firm-based referral model. Our next step will be quality assurance and our quality assurance model. And as you can see here, we have firm validation and L&I verification at play. We've identified some very specific elements with the help of folks like Corey on our advisory committee about what matters the most. And here's a little insight. It ain't timely progress reports. Okay. It's actually a lot more than that. And you all can go onto our website and find more insights about what we're doubling down on as far as a reflection of quality and effectiveness in this new model. Just for starters, though, when we talk about vocational recovery, we're looking at increased injured worker engagement using motivational interviewing skills, increased employer engagement using motivational interviewing skills, increased medical provider engagement using, you guessed it, motivational interviewing skills, and working with all the other ancillary providers using, that's right, motivational interviewing skills to help advance and move forward the return to work culture that we've put in place. Here's some of those elements right here that we're going to be starting to look at for vocational recovery referrals, but we have our own set of elements for the AWA, for plan development and plan implementation. And over the course of the next year, we are going to fully implement our quality assurance model. Those of you who purchase vocational services from firms that do business with both state fund and self-insurance will feel some of that, because I don't really think Corey's going to set up her company to segregate out quality assurance just on the state fund side. She's going to do it across the board. And excuse me if I'm speaking for you, Corey, but I think it's a pretty accurate statement. Yeah. So this benefits everybody in our system, state fund and self-insurance, I think, to a degree, but this is just an insight as to how we're going to prop up and support our vocational recovery referral and culture moving forward. And with that, we are done with the first chunk of time. Lloyd, we went over a couple minutes, but I don't think we went over many more minutes than what you stole from us initially. So we should be good. He's still a couple of minutes ahead of us.
I just want to say one thing while people think about whether they have any questions. Ryan, you mentioned the fact that worker-centric is not a claim advocacy model. And we get pushed about that a lot. Isn't this just claim advocacy? No, it's not. And I think the engagement elements of it that go across all of the stakeholders, I think a serious consideration of motivational interviewing to help aid a worker, I think those are some of the things that make claim advocacy a good foundation, but lacking when you compare it to worker-centric.
Now, customer service is important, but it is not a proxy for engagement and activation, period.
Yeah.
So,
hey, Ryan,
yes.
Would you mind bringing up slide 12 again?
Oh, you're going to ask me to share my screen again.
I was going to try to get you before you took it down there.
Okay, so hopefully you can see that now.
There you go.
And we'll go from the beginning, and I will get you to slide 12 really quickly here, Lloyd.
There you go. And I just want to say, this initial concept here, I know a lot of us have heard before, some of us haven't, but kind of help everyone where we're going. When you talked about this slide here, slide 12, it talks about work disability as a result of a decision by the worker who for potential physical blah, 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 blah. And so I just want to give a little note here to say, remember this slide when we get to Dr. Harris and motivational interviewing, because motivational interviewing is how you find out where that worker is within our system, and we try to find out where they can go within themselves. So remember this concept, and I think that's the bridge where you read this concept and you say, well, heck, we're just giving away the farm, right? And Dr. Harris is going to come back with that a little bit later and talk about how we find out and help the worker with that. So thanks for doing that, Ryan.
Yeah, Lloyd. I mean, it also shares some insights as to God, why do we have such great surgical outcomes on carpal tunnel syndrome for non-work comp claims, but in work comp, they have these extended durations that go on years and years.
Yep.
This has something to do with this definition right here.
I just want to add one more thing, Lloyd, that you reminded me of. And that is, I don't think that any worker is injured on the job where the first thing they're not thinking of is, oh my gosh, how am I going to get back to work?
Right.
But we lose them because nobody pays attention to making that path easy for them and helping them get there. But it's a rare case where a worker is injured just to say, oh, good, this is a nice vacation.
Yeah. And as professionals, we need to help the worker understand that's one of their recovery goals, just like range of motion or anything else. Getting back to work and get back to life is one of those recovery goals. So fantastic. Well, if I talk anymore, we're going to be even further behind. So we're going to turn over to Corey and Ryan to kind of talk about the Vocational Recovery Project Committee. And I think there are a lot of people that aren't even aware that that committee exists, but I think it's important for everyone to know, kind of what's going on there. And also, if anybody has questions, there may be some more questions that load up for this segment.
I'm going to share my screen and, okay. And then Ryan and I are really going to tag team this and have a conversation. Right, Ryan?
You bet.
So, and Ryan, you might be best to start this out and talk a little bit about kind of a summary of the history of the work streams in the advisory committee, and then I can talk about my role.
Sure. So when we set out to do this work, we're really trying to operationalize that vision that we shared earlier, and that's not an easy task. It's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of strategic planning and project management and so on and so forth. But we knew for sure that we couldn't redesign our system without including, at least for the Vocational Recovery Project, quite a bit of input from the private sector and bring them along. Because it's not just about goal 2, help injured workers heal and return to work. It's about making it easier to do business with labor and industries. It's also about rewarding the good actors while cracking down on the bad ones. And so we looked at all of those agency missions and goals and said, listen, if we're going to redesign our system, let's get some input from the vocational counselors, but we had to create an environment where they felt safe to really air their grievances about their experiences in working with the department for many, many years. So we had a lot of tough conversations for about 2 years prior to forming the Vocational Recovery Project. And we decided we needed to have an advisory committee because things like VTSG just weren't a good place, Vocational Technical Stakeholders Group, just wasn't really a good place to do this kind of rebuilding. That's a good stakeholder meeting where it's an exchange of information back and forth, but it wasn't really intended to be a really rebuilding of a system environment. So in order to do that, we had to create this advisory committee, and we expanded it out to 10 members. They represent some of the biggest voc firms in our system and sole proprietors. They represent small, medium-sized firms, and also folks who do self-insurance work. And so we've been working together now for the better part of 2 years. We've done a lot of rebuilding together. It's been a tough road, but we've developed a lot of products as a result of that, a lot of really great tools. And that's kind of how the advisory committee came to be. And I'm shortcutting a little bit, but I don't know, Corey, you want to add something else to it as far as your role goes?
I actually came on a little bit late, not late, but not necessarily from the beginning, because the self-insurance, being the self-insurance rep, I was invited on and had the opportunity to represent the self-insurance side. And I think that I'm really, really glad that the advisory committee opened that door, because I think that it was really important. We've already talked a little bit today about how, not only the VOC changes and changes to some of the WACs have occurred in the last year, or about a year ago, to be exact, well, a little over a year ago. Ryan already alluded also to the changes to WAC 296-15-350 and 360, which changed some of the requirements for those claims handlers that are certified. And so self-insurance side, has seen some of the impact of those changes, and part of those changes involve some training for those claims handlers to get certified. And there's WWCP has a 72 hours worth of instruction that claims handlers have to go through, and 6.5 hours involves a chapter all around managing return to work and vocational recovery outcomes. So vocational recovery really isn't just about state fund. It's not, and I know Ryan and Vicki have already said that, but my role coming into advisory committee, but also being part of WSIA, the board has been able to provide some insight into that training and hopefully tie those together a little bit. So you're going to hear a lot about, some things that are specific to state fund today, but really VOC is VOC in Washington State. And it really, there are less differences now than there used to be. And, things are changing. We've already said that. So both systems really can learn from the successes of each, but also the failures and maybe some areas that need some improvement. So the advisory committee bringing in self-insurance considerations, I think was a really big deal and a good thing. So hopefully, hopefully people can see this as an opportunity to look at VOC across Washington State, not on one side or the other. So.
Yep. I would also add too that the Vocational Recovery Project hasn't just been propped up by our 10 advisory committee members. When we first started the project, we had about 30 VRCs that were piloting vocational recovery for the better part of 20 months before we went live with it. We also had 6 work streams made up of equal divisions between, for the most part, between a number of L&I folks and a number of private sector folks to kind of work through all the various issues that were, I think, causing that bureaugenic disability. In other words, causing us to focus on each other instead of our customers. And so a lot of what we did over the last couple of years through those work streams was develop a number of different work products. And some of the examples of that can be found on our webpage. So for those people who are studying for their WWCP and are looking for more information, you can go onto the department's webpage, go under vocational services, and you will find in there things like the Firm Best Practice Agreement. That was a document that we developed in collaboration with our advisory committee. You will find in there a vocational recovery reference manual, including the vocational recovery guideline. That was put together through the work stream that oversaw our pilot and our best practices in education group. You will see in there instructions on how to effectively create using motivational interviewing, vocational recovery plan, and those instructions and what it means and what it's not. Very, very soon we will be publishing a number of online learning modules for folks in our system, and they're intended, intended audience are vocational providers, but I think everybody can benefit from it. One of them is on Work Disability Prevention 101. Another one's going to be on how to effectively complete a vocational recovery plan. Those two are going to be published very soon on our webpage. By the end of the year, we hope to have one on psychosocial risk factors and what they mean to a vocational provider, what the vocational provider's role is, how the department supports addressing those concerns. And then finally, we alluded to it at the very tail end of the last presentation, but our quality assurance model. That is, I mean, it's not an easy task. It touches a lot of different nerves for a lot of different folks for a lot of different reasons. But redefining what we mean by quality now that we find ourselves in this era of vocational recovery is necessary. And so the documents you see on our webpage that define, what are the marks we're looking for quality assurance and effectiveness in a vocational recovery referral or an ability to work assessment, plan development, or plan implementation. Much of that verbiage was provided by folks like Corey and her peers in the private sector. So these are all different tools and outputs and milestones that we've been able to produce over the last couple of years. And the list is pretty impressive when you think about it. I know it feels like it takes a long time for us to make changes, but when we get to a certain point and we look back, it's like, wow, we've come a long, long way, but we still have some ways to go.
And I'd like to add just to that as we go through the day and learning more about this. For those in the audience that only do self-insurance and maybe purchase vocational services and use providers out there, if you don't already have a sort of quality assurance expectations for your voc providers, these things can all be great tools for you to sort of figure out what you want to see and what, hopefully are paying attention to what you're getting and what services are being provided to your injured workers and your employers. So one of the things that we wanted to do is, we get up here and we talk a lot about what's happening, what we've done, what's going on. And, sometimes it's helpful to share some success stories about how using this worker-centric model has benefited somebody. So we'd like to share one, and I'll have Ryan. Oh, why won't my?
It's because we're live now, Corey. That's
I know. Okay, there. Okay, it worked. So Ryan, I'll let you kind of go through this case study. Just tell me when to change the screen.
Sure. So some folks are familiar with this, but this is just kind of a case study on, you know, when you engage the worker and you use the tools that Dr. Harris is going to talk about, they'll tell you exactly what they need versus us imparting on them what we think that case needs, going back to the talking point Lloyd made earlier. This case is just one of the ones that exemplifies that the best. This particular person, you can see the referral was made on January 17th, which is 17 days into the new era of making vocational recovery referrals as our first intervention. The claim manager said that they made the referral early because they were concerned it was going to go sideways real fast. The job of injury was a behavioral analyst assistant supervisor at a center for autistic and related disorders. The injury was an assault. This person was punched in the face by a teenage client. The accepted condition was a concussion, and this person had a master's in early education. Now, I've worked with a lot of injured workers over the course of my career. When I look at that at first, people say, what do you think is going to happen with that one? High likelihood of pension, if not a massively extended duration case at minimum, given those circumstances. But when you go into the next phase, you kind of double down on that a little bit more. So just before the worker was referred for a mental health eval, just prior to the voc recovery referral, because again, the claim manager was sensing something was going to go wrong here. One could argue that they were opening up Pandora's box by doing that, but nonetheless, this is what they did. The good news is the vocational provider got a copy of that eval that showed up in imaging and was able to look and see what was going on behind the scenes with this person. So they had a history of this stuff here: bipolar, PTSD, borderline personality disorder, depression, anxiety, suicidal self-mutilation behavior, and the diagnosis of that mental health eval was adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety. Now, everybody, I think, on this call has had a case like this come across their desk and you go, oh God, here we go. This is going to be a doozy.
The claims manager's version of that is it's going to go sideways real quick. That was
going to go sideways real quick. Yep. Yep. Which means it's going to go sideways and go real slow for a real long time. So again, the attending physician gets their hands on this, restricted return to work, containing occupation-related stress disorder, suggested the worker that she quit her job, went on to make some additional comments about how autism is overdiagnosed, and continued to self-pontificate their opinions to the worker about the profession that the worker had chosen to spend their time working in. Didn't go over that well with the worker from what I hear. Anyway, long story short, the worker revealed, because the VRC used some of the engagement strategies, motivational interviewing strategies, to find out what was really going on. Turns out that the worker's anxiety and depressive symptoms were a direct result of the restrictions the doctor put on her. Had nothing to do with her history, right? As a matter of fact, the worker actually enlisted the help of the juvenile attacker to help create a job description, job analysis to put in front of the doctor. So just an illustration of the power of getting at what's really going on between that worker's ears and finding out what they think needs to happen next. VRC called a team conference with the worker and the AP. Remember, lead with the worker, talk with the employer, approach the doctor. That's exactly what this VRDC did in this particular scenario, and it resulted in a release to work. Less than a month after the vocational recovery referral was made. Now, of course, I hand selected this one just because you just can't make this one up. This is a true case study. It happened just recently. I don't know if the person's still at work or not. I really don't know. But this just kind of illustrates the power of, if we just stop and ask some scientifically evidence-informed or based questions from the craft of motivational interviewing, you can find out how to unstick some of these cases and keep them from going sideways. So had to share that one. And Corey, I don't know if you have any other success stories or if there's people on the line.
I run through one fairly quickly. I was trying to find a good example of a self-insurance claim that I was working on, and you know, like Vicki and Ryan already alluded to, if you're doing, you know, both state fund and self-insurance, the chances are you're gonna do things the same way for both. So I was really trying to be able to give a self-insurance example. So I did have one, and this was more on the sort of the tail end of a claim where really the claim didn't start out very challenging. I mean, it was a shoulder injury. Laundry worker all they've ever done really is laundry and housekeeping work. The gentleman had language barriers, was bilingual, but gets really nervous, and when he gets nervous, the language issue is a big barrier. Employer couldn't bring him back, and actually that's why I was brought on board. The self-insurance employer and TPA have a very good return to work program. It just didn't work out. So working with him, starting out, this gentleman felt very entitled, or not entitled, it's probably the wrong word, but really kind of demanded that they had to pay him for the rest of his life, or until he went back to work, and was upset that they didn't place him. And so spent a lot of time, he had a lot of anger, spent a lot of time talking with him about the process, the return to work priorities, his opportunity to take charge of his own recovery. And we worked with his doctors to really come up sort of with a clear example of what's safe for him to do. And that was a big key, talking about not restrictions, not the negative, but really changing the conversations to talk about, what is safe for you to do, because pain means they can't do anything, right? And so, having a lot of conversations with the worker and the attending provider at the same time, really kind of brought him around. Spent a lot of time working with him while at the same time looking at the AWA return to work priorities and looking at his transferable skills, developed a resume with him, helped him with interview techniques, and getting over his sort of nervousness about certain questions. Really spent a lot of time preparing him to go out and find his own job. And it came down to really, and he made a lot of threats about getting an attorney if time loss was stopped. So by the end of it, about the same time, time loss was going to stop because he was technically employable. Labor market supported an approved transferable skill. He didn't really want to do that job. So I did ask the employer and TPA if we could give him a couple more weeks and work really close with him. And it just so happens he went out, he applied for a bunch of jobs and got a job. And historically, we've been pushed as voc providers to find people employable right away. And, this case would have ended up in litigation, but he found a job. He wasn't happy about the employer still not bringing him back, but he found a job. And the chances of him going and getting an attorney and fighting, the claim closure is next to none at this point. He's working. So it was a different approach, different conversations and communication. And I think that's a big, and that was on the self-insurance side, and having the TPA and the employer on board and supportive of that. Yes, it was a little bit more time loss, a little bit more vote costs, but we got him back to work. And he actually got himself back to work, just with a little nudging and education along the way. So.
Corey, can I add something? I know I'm not part of this presentation.
Oh, that's okay. Questions.
But when you commented about, you saw him as somebody headed to an attorney, likely into litigation, that is such an important element. You spent a little bit more time, a little bit more time loss costs, but our voc disputes have dropped off by 30%. Yes.
And pensions have gone down too, haven't they?
Yes, and the pension going down, that's a long-term thing. So it's a small amount to invest up front to avoid those long-term costs.
Yeah, and I was just going to jump in too. The comment is, I've coming from the retro world and coming from a long history of being a claims manager. Some of you may have heard me say in a presentation that workers are entitled to every benefit the system has to offer, not a penny more, not a penny less. And I have a different perspective now. And, my involvement in self-insurance has really opened my eyes with that, where, within the state fund, there are more guidelines that you need to operate in. But I think this whole perspective is saying, hey, let's operate within our guidelines, but let's make some brilliant decisions for this individual worker. And maybe that results in, this is being recorded and I'll say it, maybe that results in the worker getting some extra benefits. I didn't say that. But based on Corey's story right there, that worker's back to life, back to reality, back to living. And is that a failure of the system? And so, especially for me, this is a culture shift from a claims desk also of, our job as a claims manager is to watch the gate, and we're changing how it works now, and for the better of the worker.
So Lloyd, I'd also say too, and thanks for sharing that story, Corey, because I think it kind of illustrates how this can happen regardless of jurisdiction or state fund or self-insurance. But I would argue too, Lloyd, going back to what I made a comment earlier when we're going through the statutes, I think the person didn't get any more vocational benefit than they're entitled to because Corey executed the statutory language the right way. So there's another way to look at that too, right? Not that I'm an attorney, but I just look at it through a return to work lens.
And that's probably the more appropriate perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I would add to that, remember that the whole premise of our statute is that the workers are entitled to sure and certain relief. And maybe this provided a little more sure and certain relief than that would have been otherwise.
Yeah. And if we have better trained claims managers.
Let's talk about some of the differences between state fund and self-insurance. And you want to go first on this, Corey?
I'll just kind of I wanted to make one statement about this. The goal of helping injured workers, I'm preaching to the choir probably to the whole audience, but the goal of helping injured workers heal and return to work and, positive outcomes are all the same regardless of whether you're doing state fund or self-insured. And so, the difference is, or at least historically has been maybe some of the service delivery, maybe, how the vocational counselors brought on board. But the requirements for voc services are the same, whether it's being managed by self-insurance or state fund, with some differences in some rule and policy. When it's in rule and policy, there are some different, and these are some of those that are on the screen right now. So, kind of a compare and contrast, the referral process is very different. Ryan, you want to talk a little bit about the current, the new referral process and what's happening with that, and then I can talk about self-insurance a little bit.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we worked with a pretty broad swath of folks from the vocational community and internal partners, some of which came from claims administration, to help work through some of those issues that have been polarizing, not just the Department of Vocational Providers, but really taking our eye off the prize. And one of those had to do with how we make referrals and the inherent bias that was baked into our process, despite the fact that one could argue our vocational performance indicators were the pathway that claim managers had to use. We had some pretty candid conversations with folks, and they were willing to share that they had their list of favorites. And we know that's true. And we know that when you have a list of favorites, there's a tendency to load somebody up with way more work than they can possibly get to. And everything starts to fall apart from there. So it was a real pain point for the community, and quite frankly, a big problem for the department and how we went about making referrals. So just recently, within the last month, we've fully implemented a referral distribution process that is designed to eliminate that who's my favorite bias or that independent idea of what quality and effectiveness is. And so we're taking a much different approach to doing it to remove that bias from our system. So you hear the term captured voc. You can make that argument in certain cases on the state fund side, but not anymore because now our claim managers just request a voc referral be made, and we have a separate, different unit that's completely removed from them, distributing those referrals across our system. So that's a pretty significant shift that happened just recently. And I don't know if there's anything else I missed out on that, Corey, but I think
No, and that's probably one of the major differences with self-insurance and state fund, especially now, but even some before. But referrals, for those of you who don't do self-insurance, referrals are made on the self-insurance side by the employer or TPA managing the account, and employers or TPAs can can pick, can pick their vocational counselor and use them exclusively. And, is there anything wrong with that? I think it's called captured voc now. That's the I guess, term floating around. And, VRCs also have the opportunity on the self-insurance side to market and to meet with employers and TPAs and share what services they can provide, which again is not that's business. And the hope, is that the choices are being made based on quality. But if there's no real quality expectations for what they're purchasing, we probably can run into some problems. So that's probably a major difference at this point. And there are also no service location boundaries. Self-insurance vocational counselor can work cases all over the state. Is it best practice? It might be for that employer. It just depends on what they're looking for in a quality vocational provider, and whether they're able to deliver on those quality measures. But under state fund, the referrals are tied to certain service locations, so they do limit how far a worker can go, or a VRC can go.
So Corey, I'm looking at our time. We could spend an entire day talking about the differences between the two systems, just on these 4 bullets alone. Any more kind of salient points you want to make before we maybe go to the next slide?
Not really. I think that not really. I think
Okay.
that's probably the most important one, probably.
Okay.
So I can move that along. So how does this, and actually this will save us some time because Vicki and Ryan talked about some of the statutory language in the first presentation, but how does vocational recovery and elements used to define quality apply? Well, there's no mandated, no mandate for self-insured vocational counselors to, sign a quality or a best practices agreement, etc. But like already was said, there's enabling statutory language that applies to both state fund and self-insurers. So again, the hope is that people are looking at, the intention of vocational recovery services is to ensure appropriate support is provided to industrially injured workers and employers so that they return to work, can continue to work, or are able to become employable. And we already sort of broke that down. But really the highest priority, again, I'm just going to throw it out there, is given to returning the worker to employment, any employment. So, the quality though, the quality and definitions of quality for VOC, if you don't already have those established as a self-insured employer or TPA, it's probably a good idea to determine what quality is to you, and what's coming out of state fund with all these changes in terms of what they're requiring state fund VOC providers to do might be a good starting point or a basis or foundation for determining, well, what should I be looking at, and what should I know I'm getting. And then for vocational counselors doing self-insured work, we have an obligation to be able to answer to our customers about what we're doing and how well we're doing, and meeting whatever goals they have set or expectations they've set. So I'm rambling here, but I'm trying to get us going. And Ryan, I don't know if you want to add to this.
No, Corey, I appreciate it, but it's up there on the screen, like worker-centric work disability prevention services within the context of a vocational recovery model, not necessarily referral type, are not jurisdiction dependent. Anybody can do this stuff. And that's a point I just want to drive home over and over again. So, and I think we've kind of made that point pretty clear. So we can go to the next slide, Corey. We got about 1.5 minutes left, and I think we're doing pretty good.
Yeah. Okay. Rolling right through. So how can the self-insurance community learn more? For those of you who don't know where to go, we've thrown out a few ideas already, just through discussion, but those of you who have to go through the WWCP certification, you're going to get some of this, and by reviewing the new associated laws with that. So you'll be able to find a lot of language change and change of focus to the worker disability prevention model. And attending webinars, right? And virtual conferences like today's. The International Association of Rehabilitation Professionals puts out some great, right now, online learning opportunities, and LNI sponsored events, and the WSIA webinars. So, you know, just you being here and listening, hopefully you can take something away and learn more about this. Ryan, anything to add?
I would just add that it takes some time. This is a pretty significant shift for our system. Most of us have, you know, muscle memory connections that really the default is system-centric approach. And so learning this and adopting it and practicing it is challenging and hard, but it's the right thing to do. I would also add that aside from our time being up, according to my little timer over here, we do have, like I mentioned, some tools available on the LNI webpage. So go to Claims and Insurance, go to Vocational Services, and you will find in there a number of different resources available to you that contain everything we've talked about and much, much more, up to and including the elements of quality. Julie, I have a question.
I do. I just actually had an add-on comment. One of the things that kind of ties the self-insurance and state fund vocational process together, even more than the statute, one way to think about it is our ethics. We all have to adhere to a code of ethics for whatever certifications we have. And those ethics need to be applied universally to all of the injured workers that we're working with. So that lines up really nicely with keeping consistent on the vocational recovery model between self-insurance and state fund.
Yeah, it is a good, solid foundational cornerstone. But in our experience, Julie, I've been kind of disappointed in some of those credentialing bodies' ability to enforce those ethics. We don't regulate them. Self-insurers don't regulate them. The credentialing bodies regulate them. And there's quite a process people have to go through to submit a complaint. I've had to personally do it, and I can tell you that I did not hear back from the credentialing body. And so because of that, we've had to shore up a lot of what we're doing with other rules and approaches. So yes, it is a good foundational starting point. Yes, people should be following their ethics. And when they don't, we have some tools that we have put in place now to help us address those issues. So I think this is the last slide. Corey, you want to walk people through this one?
Sure, just really quickly. I mean, not to keep this on here, but, you know, what are you, as employers or TPAs that are purchasing vocational services, what are you paying for? What do you expect when purchasing services? What do you want to see from your vocational provider? I think that, you know, make your expectations clear. And providers, you know, vocational providers who are doing self-insurance or want to do self-insurance, communication, it always comes back to communication, but communicating with all your stakeholders and engagement. And that includes the employer and TPA, and finding out what they want and what they need to help their workers. You know, if you don't already have quality assurance expectations or don't know what your vocational counselor is doing, how do you know you're getting the best services for your employer and for your workers? So, you know, education is where it's all about. Those of you who are here that are listening, you know, just the fact that you're here and paying attention and maybe figuring out, well, maybe I could do this better, or maybe I want my voc counselor to do better, and I want better for my workers. That's like the first step. So hopefully we can all see that what we're trying to do in voc rehab in Washington State is to make, you know, make things better for the workers and the employers, and to help with that vocational recovery. So I think paying attention, and Terry's, I'm sure, going to talk a little bit about definitely talk about reporting and knowing what your counselors are doing and what you're sending to the department. So I'll be quiet on that. I'm trying to get us back around. So any questions, or I'm going to stop share. So that's it. That's a wrap.
Thanks, everybody.
Anyway.
Thank you. And, you know, one of the things in one of our pre-meetings for this presentation, one of the things that jumped out at me is, I think it was a comment you made, Ryan, where, you know, the AWA was kind of, that was the systematic approach we were operating under. And, you know, I look back and I feel a little bit guilty about it. how maybe I railroaded some of those things through. But from a claims manager's perspective, we were pushing the voc community to the quickest resolution of the claim. And that was our perspective, because we were focusing on the system and applying the system to resolve these workers' problems. And so, I think this is where it really has to be a culture shift, not just a few people doing some random things, where we need the claims community in on this as well, because it has to be a team approach. It has to be a collective approach by the claims manager, the vocational counselor, the employer, all those things. But I see where the system, and I guess you've been trying to explain this to me for about a year, but it just kind of lit up the other day where you're saying, the system was designed to drive we were using the system to drive workers to an outcome. And as professionals, we're all just trying to do our job as efficiently and quickly as possible.
But I think it's key I like the term, there was a real big systemic approach, and voc counselors were used more as an adjudicative tool than an actual counseling measure to help people get back to work. And so I think that's where now with this worker-centric approach, I think that focus has sort of brought it back to hopefully where we should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard some vocational counselors say, I now actually get to do vocational counseling.
Yeah. And the challenge, Lloyd, is that 80 to 90% of the time, that adjudication approach that you talked about works. It's the 10 to 20% of the time where it doesn't, that costs and bogs down our system, and litigation and extended duration and societal harm and system harm and human harm. And that's the trick with this. It's identifying when do you have one of those cases that's the 10 or 20%. Because most of the time people, they do want to go back to work, they go back to work quite quickly, and claims adjudication is set up quite well to help facilitate a pretty rapid response and process. But 10 to 20% of the time, you need something different. And that approach will actually do the opposite effect. And that's, I think, what our data has shown us at the state fund side. So yeah. Thanks again.
Fantastic. Well, let's do this. We're running just a few minutes behind, but I think it's important everybody take a quick break. Let's take 5 minutes. We're going to take 5 minutes. My clock says 2:33 right now. Let's get back in 5 minutes, and we'll jump back into it with Dr. Harris and motivational interviewing.
For example, when the plan end date becomes concrete, a plan modification should be submitted if the new end date is different than the originally approved end date, since we can't usually tell the exact end date 2 years in the future. The option 1 plan modification accountability agreement is required if the worker is being asked to do anything different. Different classes or classes being taken during a different quarter because of the ever-changing availability, yes, we need the accountability attachment. If you're just moving funds from books to tuition, no, then we don't need it. If the worker doesn't acknowledge that they are agreeing to the change, it becomes very difficult to hold them accountable. Encumbrance forms for plan modifications must encompass the entire plan and are essentially a replacement for any prior encumbrance form. All the funds spent and planned for future spending, including travel, all training providers, all equipment, with the exception of pre-job accommodations, should be on the modified encumbrance form. I wanted to mention a few things about monitoring plans and non-cooperation. We have the clients who breeze through everything and need very little help from the VRC. And then we have the folks that struggle and need a lot of time and assistance. So close plan monitoring can help remove barriers for a worker who is actively participating or wants to actively participate. It can also provide documentation of a pattern of behavior for our very small number of workers who are non-cooperative, even when the barriers have been removed. I often get calls near the end of a plan to staff non-cooperation. I typically ask about the formal non-cooperation letters that have been written by the adjuster to the worker. The VRC will often describe a pattern of behavior that may not have been clearly documented. Delaying in documenting non-cooperation brings a lot of challenges to the table. One approach that I've seen work really well is sort of a combo carrot and stick strategy. The VRC explains to the worker that they're not currently in compliance with the applicable section of the accountability agreement as it relates to their plan. They can explain to the worker that the adjuster may be sending them a letter that mentions non-cooperation, and the worker will need to respond and document for the adjuster why they have not complied with the accountability agreement. The VRC can continue helping the worker to remove barriers to their success, which is the carrot. The stick is the formal non-cooperation letter when the accountability agreement is violated. If the worker continues participating in their training, they succeed, hopefully returning to work, and then the claim typically closes. But if the worker stops participating without good cause, then the foundation for documenting a pattern of non-cooperative behavior is already in place. When a plan goes sideways and is no longer going to be completed as anticipated, the first thing we ask the VRC to determine is whether or not the plan can be salvaged. If it can be salvaged, for example, the worker will repeat a class the following quarter, then we should receive a plan modification request. We should not typically be seeing plan modifications with gaps of several months in which the worker did not attend training. During that gap, the clock never stops ticking toward the statutory time limit. And it's really important that the worker has access to the benefits to which they are entitled. If the plan cannot be salvaged in a reasonably timely manner, then a plan failure report should be submitted. We have a lot of plans that have required plan modifications due to the complications caused by the pandemic. And it's important to document more than just that the worker could not complete the quarter due to a change to an online format, for example. The modification should include the specific difficulties the worker had, how the VRC worked with the worker to remove barriers, and the modification that will allow the plan to be salvaged. Plan implementation typically closes with either a completed plan or a failed plan outcome, and the requirements of the report are described in the WAC. A plan that was completed should include unofficial transcripts for plans at a traditional school. A failed plan report, when it's not due to the worker's actions, should include the last date the worker attended and all training costs expended, other than travel or pre-job accommodation costs. We also need to know if there has been any change in the medical status and whether or not the worker is still likely to benefit. If there's no change in the medical and the worker is still likely to benefit, then including this information is the most expedient manner to get the worker immediately back into plan development and continue moving forward. When a training plan requires time and/or funds beyond the statutory limit for that particular plan, the director can choose to grant an AVA, additional vocational assistance. The department will be putting out additional guidance in the near future regarding AVAs. It is important for the vocational report to clearly document the time and funds expended under all prior and current plans, failed or completed on this claim. An option 2 recommendation should include a SIVR, a vocational award payment schedule, and a plan implementation closing report as outlined in the WAC. The order granting the option 2 selection states that the worker is entitled to time loss compensation through the date of the order. Complex adjudicative complications can occur when we do not receive the option 2 selection paperwork within the time frame required by the WAC, which is 5 working days from the employer's receipt. Complications can delay claim resolution. Let's discuss some common issues that cause delays. If claim allowance documentation has not been submitted to the department, the claim is not showing as allowed in the L&I system, and I can't take action on your vocational request. If the SIVR is incomplete or unsigned, unclear, or it doesn't match the attached vocational report, then I will have to ask for more information. Sending the SIVR and the vocational report mixed in with another document type, such as a claim closure request, will cause a delay. I won't know it's there until the L&I adjudicator is reviewing that request for you. When required physical demands in the labor market survey exceed the physical capacities in the medical documentation or medically approved job analysis, the recommendation cannot be approved. Sometimes the relevant geographical labor market has not been considered. For example, where was the worker last gainfully employed? The job of injury was not always the most recent employment, especially on reopened claims. A return to work or able to work outcome cannot be supported if the work pattern does not meet or exceed the work pattern of injury. For example, a new job working 25 hours a week does not resolve vocational issues on the claim if the work pattern of injury was 40 hours per week. When an SNA 6 outcome is recommended, or the worker voluntarily retires, all the elements of an occupational possibility are required to support the outcome. Additionally, the worker must have retired from all work and not just from the employer of injury for this outcome to be supported. If the SIVR, the vocational report, or the attachments are missing from the document, I cannot proceed with reviewing the recommendation. If a labor market survey requires a criminal background check or driver's license or clean driving record, the report should document how the VRC established that the requirement was met. Are there any other open claims? One example was with a worker with 3 claims with the same employer. Vocational services were only assigned on the one claim, and a plan was submitted under that one claim. That plan clearly addressed the medical issues of the other claims, and he was pretty much ready to go, except for the open claims that didn't have voc. So if the plan had been approved under the one claim and the worker had taken option 2, the employer still would have had to resolve vocational services under the other 2 claims. In this case, that would have meant finding the worker eligible under the other 2 claims and paying for a training plan, because the option 2 order and benefit would have only applied to the one claim and he couldn't have chosen it again. And then we look at if other conditions have been addressed. One example that pops up a lot is when mental health conditions are noted and we receive a report recommending that the worker is eligible. We need to know that mental health work restrictions from a qualified provider, we need to know what they are and whether or not they affect the worker's ability to benefit from services and return to work. Most of the phone calls I make and receive are to and from VRCs. However, I welcome calls from employers and their representatives. If more information is needed to make a vocational determination, then I've either called the VRC or the employer, and there's a claim file note to document the call. The phone call allows the employer or the VRC to be notified immediately that more information is needed. On assessments, I'll write a letter to document that additional information was necessary or is necessary. On retraining plans, however, I typically do not write a letter to request additional information because the time limit for a formal decision is so short. I just use the phone call, and if I don't get the information in time, then I still have to write the decision letter. If you're submitting additional information that's been requested, just send it like you would send anything else to the claim file. The self-insurance claims fax number is listed here on this slide. If you need a status update, please check CAC first. VRCs have access to CAC during an open plan development or plan implementation referral only. If a VRC doesn't know if their report was received during an assessment, we would ask the VRC to contact the employer to access the file to see if it's showing in the file. If it's been a couple of weeks since the vocational request was submitted, please feel free to call me at that point to ensure that it's on my list to review. I'm not usually that far behind. One quick check for VRCs recommending the worker is eligible is to attempt to access CAC on the claim. If there's no CAC access, then I have not approved the recommendation to move into plan development yet. So that's just a quick way to check without having to wait for a callback from me. I welcome your calls to staff unusual scenarios and to brainstorm ideas on how to remove barriers for our workers. Here's the tricky part. I want to answer all of your questions, but I cannot be responsible for providing in-depth formal training on a one-on-one basis on basic elements of the vocational recommendation or process. We anticipate that you've checked your resources, brainstormed with a trusted colleague, and or staffed with your supervisor before calling to staff a claim. I mean, shoot, if you can find it in the WAC, I'm pretty sure that makes a better argument than because the VSS said so. Again, I want to emphasize that I welcome your calls. I just don't want you to discount the wealth of experience available within your own company and industry. If you're calling to staff a claim, please keep in mind that staffing with me via phone without a report in front of me it's different than when I have the report, the attachments, and all the different things I check in our system. For example, if you're calling to staff a plan modification and the worker had a claim-related surgery during the plan, but it's not mentioned in our conversation, this can vastly affect the outcome of the questions I might ask you to consider. Now we'll go through this line by line. No, I'm just kidding. So this slide includes descriptions of how to get to several of the items on our website and includes the WAC references for things I've discussed today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share tips and tricks I have to help your claims move forward as efficiently as possible and get our workers to where they need to be and save money in the process. I know we're all constantly striving for improvement, myself included. If we aren't made aware of how we can improve, it's hard to know where to focus our efforts. And I hope you know this is a two-way street. And even though I'm already nice and funny and smart, I really hope you'll be willing to share with me when I've missed the mark on something, or when you figure out a cool new solution to a problem. Continuous learning is an important part of our work, and I hope I can be as much of a help to you as you guys are to me. So thank you for your time.
All right, thanks, Terry. Any questions? I'm watching our Q&A here. We have built in some time. We're coming into our last stretch here, but I hope if nothing else, you've recognized Terry as a new resource if you weren't aware of her already, and certainly.
Lloyd,
yeah.
I definitely think that getting her PowerPoint is going to be extremely helpful. There was lots of great information in there that, you know, sometimes people might not be aware of. So that's going to be a great resource. So.
Yeah, I was thinking, heads up, Terry, we might want to do a static recording of that as a stand-up resource downstream. A lot of good information there. All right. Okay. So now we're kind of moving into our last stretch here. We're actually doing pretty good on time. It's 3:33. We have about a half an hour to wrap up with Julie. And I think this is a good segue as well off of the topic of, you know, how things are supposed to be done and how the world is today and all of those gray areas. Real quick before we transition over there, you know, Terry, from your role, you know, I'm springing this on you, but from your role, you know, what do you think's kind of the biggest question that comes your way regarding the pandemic and how it's influenced, you know, everything? Does there seem to be like one area that seems to ring your telephone more often than others?
Oh, that's so funny you should mention that, because our next speaker is going to discuss exactly that. So yes, labor market surveys have come up quite a bit. And also plans, modifying plans. Hey, my worker did not do well with this online format now, or they're section, their lab wasn't available because they couldn't do that piece of it. It's the last quarter. What do we do now? We still need to, you know, get
Yeah.
something going for them. So those are the two biggest.
Yeah, so that's kind of moving into this last segment. That's kind of the big unknown right now, and the uneasiness I feel in my claims management heart is all of those people that were already going down a certain path, and we had already done all the right things, hopefully, and got them on a path to work recovery. And then the pandemic hits and school is different, training is different, OJTs are different. Every tool we have at our fingertips is different. And our instinct is to say, oh gosh. But the world changes and we evolve with it. And I think that's kind of, for me, one of the biggest unknowns is what about those people that were almost done? We're almost through the process or just entering the process. You know, how do we reevaluate what the labor market is and how do we know what it'll be in the future? So Julie has agreed to jump in here and give us some context of the labor market. And but I really kind of see this last segment as a very conversational aspect of this because I think there's a lot of unknowns in this. Julie?
Yeah, I hope so. That's what I was going to say too. It's hard with the Zoom format, but I do welcome questions, comments, ideas. This is really conversational. Before we launch into labor markets specifically though, in talking about vocational recovery, I wanted to tell you what I'm really excited about just in terms of self-insured employers and their representatives, which is skill enhancement. The opportunity for skill enhancement is something that we have had some luck with in the past, but now we really have the endorsement of Labor and Industries. If you have an employee that you like and they like you and they want to maybe attend some computer classes or they want to get a safety certification or something like that, we have a lot more flexibility on the early end of the claim to really help them and provide them with things like resume services, computer classes, things like that. That hasn't always been sort of the model. And so I'm excited that we're encouraged to help people actually return to work and obtain work as soon as possible rather than waiting until we have to officially maybe find them eligible. I mean, there are a lot of motivated people out there that would take opportunities that were offered earlier. So that's one thing I'm excited about. And then with labor markets, as you know, COVID is bad. Our usual unemployment rate in Washington is about just under 5%, and now it's just under 10%. So it's about doubled. That being said, since Lloyd just talked about retraining plans, usually we're trying to retrain people for professional occupations that will be something they can do physically for the rest of their lives. So hopefully we will have chosen something that would not be as impacted like the restaurant industry or retail or construction or something like that. Hopefully we will have chosen something in a hardier field for a pandemic, which we didn't really know what that is, but now we kind of do, right? We know that medical is doing better than ever. Online medical opportunities are starting to exist more and more. All of the support businesses for medicine, for dental, all of that stuff's doing great. So hopefully we will have chosen retraining goals that are pretty professional and lasting occupations. The one that sticks out to me the most probably right now though is if we were trying to gear someone toward education, toward becoming a paraeducator or a teacher. That labor market is pretty much gone, as most of you know right now, because it's just so unknown. So if we're never going back to brick and mortar, do we need helpers in the classrooms? We just don't know. And so that's a good example. Now the department, most of you, all of the voc counselors on here, we all received a bulletin early on from Labor and Industries that said, you know, continue to do labor markets as you do them, use your best judgment. You still have the burden of identifying sufficient opportunity for these jobs. And so that's great. There was a moment there where there was pretty much a shutdown though. And what I did want to mention, because I think it will come up at cases that are litigated later, is that there were workers' attorneys who were saying to me, that's all fine and good, and if the department approves it, that's great, but when we go litigate this at the board in 2 years, I'm going to say to you on the stand, did you really think that this person could get a job during a shutdown in a pandemic? And so while it's a case-by-case basis, I just think that's something you should consider down the road is, are you really, really comfortable that you have a very positive labor market that will stand the test of time and stand the hopefully unrealistic and dramatic cross-examination 2 years from now, but who knows, we might still be in a pandemic. So I think it's mostly just important to really put together good, solid labor markets that you can stand behind at Terry's level or another VSS's level, at the vocational dispute level, at the board level. Even if it was taken to a jury trial, would you feel comfortable saying, yes, during the pandemic, there was sufficient opportunity for this job? And there are. There are many. The fast food restaurants are busier than ever. Obviously, there's tons of delivery opportunities. So we just have to kind of think of new opportunities and access those as opposed to going to our old standbys. I would liken it to parking lot attendant. Most of you have been around long enough to remember when pretty much everyone was employable as a parking lot attendant because it was the lightest cashiering job on the planet. But then it pretty much went away and was no longer a positive labor market. So we just have to adjust and pivot and identify new opportunities. One of those opportunities is there's a pretty robust customer service online labor market now for people to work at home doing customer service. Healthcare more and more. Telephonic nursing is obviously bigger than ever. I'm starting to see some good opportunities in telephonic physical therapy. I'm starting to see some opportunities, obviously, in mental health work. Dr. Harris has been doing Zoom now for how many years? Like 5? Yeah. So telehealth is a great direction, and we're seeing a lot more opportunities there, but also entry-level jobs like customer service and accounts payable and things like that. So I think if we just pivot our thinking a little bit, we'll get through this just fine, because just jobs are going to change. And if you think about it, other than retail and we don't generally find people employable or retrain them for restaurant work just because of the work pattern. But if you think about it, a lot of the jobs that have gone away are not jobs we were retraining people for or finding them employable in because they were already somewhat marginalized, like restaurant work, not always guaranteeing a certain number of hours, things like that. Kelly says, Dr. Harris, can you provide telehealth, behavioral health visits for claimants that have moved out of state?
Yes, we are right now doing that in Iowa, Texas, and working on California. So the good news is that a lot of the credentialing boards are allowing for emergency reciprocity, so you don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. So just let us know what state it is, and we work with the claims manager here and get it done.
Yeah, and to that emergency point with the labor market, nursing, state licensure for nursing is very close to being expanded to all 50 states, so that nurses that work by phone no longer need to get licensed in a specific state. They will have a license that applies. So there's going to be some great opportunities for work. And for those of us who've done vocational counseling for a while, one of our biggest obstacles has always been remote geographic regions. So getting online, in many ways, the labor market's really opening up for us because we're getting these online opportunities for people that live in the middle of nowhere. They can now maybe maintain, Terry and I were talking the other day about a nurse who lives, about 100 miles outside of Spokane, and now with online opportunities, she can stay in her usual occupation. So instead of saying, well, I have to retrain her, even though she's a nurse, because she doesn't live anywhere near anything and it doesn't meet the labor market, now I can say, hey, there's this online opportunity. You can still make over $100,000 a year working in OMAC or wherever it is. So I think we just have to change and, bob and weave and flow with the labor market, which we always have. We had the recession of 2008 to contend with that definitely took out a lot of jobs as well.
Hey, Julie, quick question, I guess, kind of on that topic. Since the pandemic has set in, do you see, or anybody here, do you see vocational counselors communicating via Zoom or I've heard a lot of presentations on telehealth at this point, and how, medical providers are actually seeing a lot of things and opportunities to evaluate the worker via Zoom that they think they wouldn't have seen in their clinical, environment. Can you speak to that, or anybody else? I'd be interested to hear how that relationship is going, and also, the concept of, does this give us more opportunity to have more collaborative sessions with the worker at the table?
Mm-hmm. Yes, And Corey, you probably are too. I'm doing all my intakes by Zoom if they'll let me.
Yeah.
It just depends
Yeah.
on the technological savvy of the worker, of course,
The
too.
worker.
And workers are generally open to it?
Well, you know, many of them have smartphones. So, I mean, sometimes we've had a couple cases where walking them through downloading the app and they can use it, you know, it depends on their phone, but most of them, if they have a smartphone, can work through it, and it is nice. But telephonic also, just, you know, if they're not comfortable with that. But yes, great with doctors too.
Yeah, and FaceTime too. It doesn't have to be a
Mhm.
difficult application. A lot of people
Right.
know FaceTime because they do it with their kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess another aspect of this is that very intake process might be training them for the future and communicating with their own families.
Nice segue, because one of the things I was just going to talk about is one of the potential barriers we have right now is all training is moving to online training, right? So we've got people that maybe really aren't best served in an online capacity, but it's all we've got for the time being. So really retraining now, quote unquote, retraining or adding skills for people, just utilizing the Blackboard system or Zoom and learning to log on and following someone visually over a computer screen. This is adding a lot more skills to their program, because they're learning how to interact with the public in the way that all professionals are interacting now. So that does give them more quote unquote transferable skills, but really useful skills that will give them confidence going into the workforce as well. So there are going to be some people that just can't learn this way. And that's just, people's brains work differently, but we'll give it a try. But I think for those who do it, the confidence, for years we retrained people and had to start from absolute scratch with computer classes. It would be, here's how to turn on a computer. Here's what it looks like. Here's where your fingers go. Here's your keyboarding 1 class. So I think we're going to start to see a baseline student that already has more skills than we were working with in the past as a result of this pandemic.
Interesting.
Any other questions?
Not seeing any other questions. Curious if anybody else has seen other opportunities, unexpected opportunities.
Yeah, does anyone want to share some good jobs they've seen out there or job growth?
I think there's actually been some COVID related jobs. Whether they'll stick around or not is questionable, but you know, there's been a lot of opportunity for return to work to modified duty because of COVID related jobs.
Thermometer
guy. You know, we have in agriculture, we have the people that are having to wipe down every surface, you know, and that's a great, you know, it's a great opportunity for employers to bring people back, because they're required to have some of those things in place in order to be operational. So right now there have been some new opportunities because of it. So.
Yeah, and I think construction, there's a lot more people taking temperatures and learning safety procedures, and there's more people being sort of deputized as safety assistants on construction sites, which again is something you could add some skills to and even render them employable in that capacity going forward without even needing to go to school further. So these opportunities are there. We just have to find them. So if anybody has any other good suggestions like Corey's, please share them. Even just type it into the Q&A section.
Yeah, so one of the questions here is not a question, but I've talked with security guard companies that are having an uptick in demand due to the pandemic. So that security guard might be coming back.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I started taking notes of all the pharmacies now that I see a security guard, and I ask them, are you working full time? They go, yeah, and I get excited because that's a whole new branch of security work that, you know, is just involves standing, which isn't easy for everyone. But so that's a good opportunity because I've noticed all of them have security guards. Definitely construction has more opportunities like safety monitors, temperature monitor. What else? What else has anyone seen? Obviously delivery opportunities.
Yeah, so another one here, our younger workforce, younger in quotation marks, of course, because I'm younger than someone. Our younger workforce has been frustrated with the old school way of business has been done. This will be much easier for them. Do you anticipate pensions increasing for the aging workforce who aren't as techy?
Yeah.
Question.
Do you want a positive answer or a skeptic?
I think that it depends.
A prediction, maybe.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some serious challenges moving forward. So I think that because of the pandemic and because of the impact to the traditional training modalities that we've had, because of some of the news of private schools and distance learning, I do think that there's going to be a bit of a setback temporarily, but I do believe that we will advance past that period of time. It's part and parcel with some of the data hits that we're going to experience as a result of COVID. But
right,
you know, it's just, we know why it's happening. It's not like something systemic. It's pandemic. It's different, and it doesn't make it better or less of an impact to those people that are affected. But I do believe it's something that's going to happen, and I think that if we're prepared for it, we will recover more quickly as a system. And all jurisdictions are feeling this across the nation. We've talked with people in Ohio, we've talked with people in Texas, in Rhode Island, in New York, Saskatchewan. They're all in a very similar predicament. So this is part and parcel with where we're at right now, unfortunately. That's neither positive nor negative. It's more just of a statement about, I think, where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Ryan, you were saying the other day that, you know, this was going to kind of happen anyway. There's going to be people left behind as the next revolution is not industrial, right? It's informational. And so this was going to happen anyway. This is just an accelerant. Now in Washington specifically, the other fuel to the fire, or the other accelerant, is also the office career situation that happened, which unfortunately took out one form of training to a degree. For people to learn online at home. There are other providers, but that combined with the pandemic, combined with an aging workforce that hasn't used computers, there's definitely going to be a good chunk of people that probably fall out of the system.
Yep. All right. Question here. Do you think Washington should open up to full compromise and release as a result of the challenges to our employability process?
I think that's a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yeah.
I'm not getting into that one. 25 years I've been listening to that one.
This is the vocational workshop. We are having a legal workshop series in October. So stay tuned to our that's a great question to move forward to our legal workshop.
And on a positive note, incrementally, I do think just CRSSAs have helped so much. And I think that, you know, lowering the age to 50 has helped a ton. You know, as vocational counselors, we all, you know, have had the 73-year-old with a bad hand and English as a second language. And we just had nothing we could do. We just had to keep trying and trying and trying. So where it's come so far has been super helpful. Also, allowing them to choose option 2 up to 90 days into the plan has made a big difference. Making option 2 9 months versus 6 months has made a big difference. So I think we're incrementally getting toward, if not compromise and release, I think we're inching our way toward some sort of more solution-based outcomes.
Sure. And I think with the structured settlements, we're getting closer. I think another encouraging point, if nothing else, this is just an encouraging Lloyd perspective, all right? So when you look at all of the change that happened in the 2010 legislature, that resulted in a lot of movement in some of the things business had been pushing for many years, it was the economic downturn that allowed for that change. You look at various points in workers' comp history, those major reforms happened after some significant social change. 1971 that Vicki mentioned earlier, you know, there were some major social reforms that were going on in the 60s and 70s that led to, hey, maybe we need to cover more than just the people who are in, maybe we need to cover the office workers too. Maybe they have to provide for their family as well. Then you look at, you know, 81, we added retro. Well, there was an economic decline in the 70s, the oil crisis. You know, we then look at the 2010 legislature. So in context of compromise and release, personally, I don't know that that is the fix to our problem. I think a lot of compromises by a lot of different parties in the system, and really getting to what's the proper outcome for an individual who is like no other. And every worker, I often, if you've ever worked for me, you've heard the term that every claim is a snowflake, and that you can't put every worker in the same system box and it be the right outcome for them, much less all the other goals that we're trying to obtain. So interesting. Well, yeah, boy, you got me on my soapbox with that one. Here's another question. If, oh, this is from our same anonymous attendee. If it was, DLI wouldn't have invested so much time and money in the Voc Recovery project. Why do you think the problem is temporary?
So I would say that the Voc Recovery project is really aimed at solving the work disability problem. Compromise and release does not solve the work disability problem. It doesn't get people back to work. It gets people out of the system. And that's where I'm saying it. As far as the amount of time and money the department has spent on the project over the last couple of years, I would have to say that the investment that we made has offset hundreds of millions of dollars in future costs. And so we're going about solving the problem in a little bit of a different way. I do think that the other tools that we have in place, structured settlements, option 2, are great tools and work fantastically for just the right people. And to Lloyd's point, there could be something that comes as a result of this that helps our system evolve even that much more. But, from my perspective, getting people back to work versus closing their claims are two different things. And so that's why my response was what it was. Mm-hmm. So it depends on what the stated goal is.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, we're now at 3 minutes, or 3:57. We have 3 minutes until our stated close. Seeing no more questions. Any other random thoughts? Because I'll interject mine. Carrie laughed at that one. I could hear it from the other room.
Go ahead, Lloyd. Be random.
Okay, well, I've been doing that all day. So anyway, I do want to just thank everybody who has helped us out here today. Also, it kind of acknowledge that we're all in this state of change. We're all changing together. Workers are going through the same chaos and unknown that we are in the system. And I think it's important that people understand that the whole world's changing. We all have to, Julie, you mentioned pivot. We have to kind of pivot and adjust. And I think workers are in a better place to adjust because we've all had to be there. And change is something that works easier for some than others. And if change works easily for me and it doesn't work easily for the person I'm trying to help, where's my responsibility? So from the concept of compromise and release, I really do see that as a legal issue in the world of workers' compensation. And I would say that from the perspective of an adjudicator, from the perspective of a medical professional, from the perspective of a vocational counselor, and several other roles in the industry, our job is that this particular snowflake claim does not become one of the 5%. Or whatever percentage that is that we define as ultimate failure or partial failure. My job as a claims adjudicator, as a part of this system, is how do I help every claim go the best way? And there will always be the legal issues and challenges. And even Julie, you mentioned that right now you're doing the best you can in that situation, and the attorney's letting you know right up front, when we get to litigation, I'll shoot you down, right? But what can you do but your best? And who knows, what that goes. But I think it's easy to be discouraged by concepts like that. But if we have a good resource and we have a good process that we can follow, the system has guidelines, but we need to compromise within that system. Maybe that's the compromise and release. So there's Lloyd's random version of compromise and release. How's that, Dr. Harris? All right, I get the thumbs up. All right. Well, we're now right at 4 o'clock. Thank you all for attending. We will get you a survey out probably tomorrow. Please give us some feedback. Is that tomorrow? You'll also get a link right afterwards. I have my reading glasses on, so I can't see, or I can only hear. So please give us the feedback. That's the point. Give us the feedback. We're trying to adjust our training to fit your needs in this new world for you as well. And really appreciate all of our speakers here today and the generous contributors to our organization that help us out here. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Stay cool.
All right.